And I think Kai's experience was a very, very strong example of how, that particularly with pediatric, I guess, when you're talking about pediatric death, you've got to you've got to listen to the parents. It's not that you've got to, they're right, but you've got to accept the parents as another and potentially really important data point or insight about what's going on with your patient.
Hi, I'm Xian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. We talk about ways to put the human back at the center of care.
Waiting Room Revolution starts right now. We are very excited today. Every once in a while, we get to hear from patients and families directly. And today we have that honor. We have Heike Fabig and Richard Boele, who are Australian parents who I know personally, but they've shared their story about navigating the end-of-life care journey for their two sons, Kai and Bodhi, who both faced life-limiting illnesses. And we're going to hear from them today about how those stories affected them, how they were different, how one got maybe more support than the other, and what advice they have for how we can make the system better. So, Heike, Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, good evening, and yes, so we are on other sides of the world.
Yeah, because 4 o'clock in the afternoon here and 6 in the morning in Australia, where you are.
That's right.
Yeah, it's always a real joy that we get to do this and meet people from all over the world. And I can just share that we met on a panel in Australia. It was in Sydney, right, just outside Sydney, and I was just really impressed and blown away by and moved by your story and how articulate you both were, but also how brave. I know that's not necessarily the best word, and how you shared, what a personal story of your lives, but also how clear you were and how things could be better. So I appreciated that, and I'm really glad we could find time to do this today.
No, we want to thank you. I mean, when you have been through what we have been through, the only way to make any sense of that is to talk about it in the hope that it gets better for the future. And you've given us that platform. So we're the ones grateful to you.
Yeah. Before we get into all the healthcare stuff, I would love to hear a little bit more about the both of you, your family. Maybe you can tell us a little bit of a memory of your family when you were parents to Kai and Bodhi. Well, maybe start with how you two met. How did you two met? You both are really unique people.
Oh my God, that's
another long story.
Podcast in itself. But we were both human. I'll try and keep the story short. We were both human rights workers, and we met at a conference on the rights of Indigenous people in the Asia Pacific. In Belgium, where I was living, while Richard was living next door in the Netherlands. And we were introduced by a mutual friend who's an Australian Aboriginal woman. My family is originally from Germany and moved to Belgium for 2 years to do some work and have never left. And Richard's family is originally from the Netherlands, and they migrated to Australia. And Richard lived in Holland for a little while, discovering the roots. And so there's quite a geographical, generational journey before the two of us bumped into each other in Brussels. And then bizarrely, got introduced to each other by an Australian Aboriginal woman who said she did some traditional matchmaking, singing. Anyway, he walked into the room and I knew I was going to marry this guy. So.
Then I'm still working on it, all right? So I'm a little more cautious. So 32 years later, at some point, I'm going to give in to that feeling. But anyway, still got to test the relationship. Not quite sure yet.
Sure.
And tell us about Kai and Bodhi. What were they like as boys?
Well, Kai was obviously the firstborn. He was our very first child. And we didn't really know what we were getting into, like most new parents. And, it became pretty obvious that he was slower developing than other children. But look, honestly, he was the most beautiful baby and a very, very handsome man when he was older. And you're just in love with your child, and you think, oh, well, also he's a boy. Boys are a bit slower. It'll sort itself out. So we sort of did denial quite well for a while. We became experts in that for a few years, and until it just became too glaringly obvious that he was not developing the way other children developed. And
we had the kind of global, diagnosis, which isn't one of
global
global
developmental
developmental delay.
delay.
You just, so, and it was really funny because in retrospect, of course, then my mother was like, oh, and I knew as soon as he didn't do this, I knew as soon as he didn't do that. But everyone was fairly gentle, right? Because he was the first one. So and I remember walking, remember? He walked pretty much the same time his younger brother.
Yes, his younger brother, which is a third child, walked, and Kai was watching it. I think he was 4 years old.
Yep.
And he was watching his brother walk, and Kai by then was sort of trying to walk with a walking frame, and you could see it in his face, like, I'm not having that. And he left his walking frame behind and just walked to a friend that we had visiting, and we were all just completely shocked. And that kind of typifies Kai a bit. He was a very stubborn, very determined person. Had a lot of difficulties in life, but just absolutely plowed through it. And I guess this is one of the joyful things about Kai, because he really, certainly when he was younger, lived life to the full. But as pain started to take over, it has a flip side in that he did not really want to discuss, or maybe he did not know how to discuss pain. So he kept it largely to himself and just plowed through it. And it's something we only really learned with Bodhi later on, who was very articulate and could describe the pain. And it's one of those parts of this whole palliative care journey that we wish we had known what Kai was feeling, so that we could have better managed his pain. And I think he would have had a better quality of life in the later years when the neuropathy and all the pain kicked in, had we only known. Now, there's no one to blame for this. That was a little bit Kai. He just didn't want to bother mommy and daddy because, we already had a lot to do. And he was a very considerate young man, always thinking about others first. So he didn't say anything, and that was a deliberate choice of his. But I wish we'd been a little bit more cluey. But then again, having said that, so we had our children. We had 3 children, and 2 of them had this thing. And of course, we went
Which,
and
by
had.
the way, remains undiagnosed.
Yes,
Of
course, we went and had diagnostic testing done numerous times, both in the US, in the UK, and in Australia. But what it actually is, we don't know.
And in fact, they both presented differently. With Bodhi, there was probably a couple of years there where we thought, oh, it's presenting that differently that we're probably going to get to like 30s. We were thinking early 30s, and then it was just remarkable. Bodhi, while his trajectory his whole life was very different from his brother, it wasn't in the last 6 months. It's almost like it then just switched on and accelerated. And he took exactly the same path towards the end that his brother did. So in that sense, it was a bit, I think we were a bit disappointed because we genuinely thought because he presented differently that would have a prognosis, that would impact on prognosis. But in the end, Kai died when he was 17 and a half.
Yeah.
And Bodhi made it to just like a few weeks past 18.
Wow.
It was almost like their bodies were timed to die at the same, whatever that is that they had, it set a clock running.
I'm keeping track because you told us a little bit about Kai's personality and who he was, but I didn't want to miss the chance to tell us about Bodhi as a person, and then I'm sure we'll get into the healthcare stuff. But Bodhi was your third, right? Your youngest, yeah?
Yes, that's right. He was the youngest.
And he was, I have to say, I mean, I'm slightly biased, it being our son, but he was a force of nature. So he only lived till 18, but he got some serious stuff done in Australia. So he did some campaigning that he identified, issues that he identified. There's the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which most of your listeners will know about, and there's a walkway along it, so you can walk over the bridge. It's the most beautiful little walk. It's on the side of the Opera House, so you see the sparkling harbour and the beautiful Opera House. But you had to go up 64 steps to get to that walkway. And the idea had always been that for the 2000 Australian Olympics and Paralympics, a lift would be built. But that didn't happen. And Bodhi decided that wasn't good enough. So he joined a campaign, and he wrote a letter to Prince Harry at the time saying, Prince Harry, you've got all your athletes coming for the Invictus Games in Australia in 2018. Did you know that none of your athletes can go up that bridge and do that walk? And I can't tell you exactly how the campaign went, but there is now a lift on both sides. Bodhi was also part of changing some legislation here in Australia around LGBTQI plus rights. He was known at his high school as an activist. On Thursdays, he would bring coffee to the school principal, and she would see him coming on Thursdays and go, oh my God, what have I not done? Because he would always have a request for her of, this is not accessible, that's not inclusive enough. He really was quite a formidable young person.
Very competitive, because he had a passion which was a Paralympic sport called bocce. And he and his brother Kai started playing it when they were younger, but it became a real passion for Bodhi, to the point that the last thing he did when he got out of bed, the last thing that he was able to do and forced himself to do, was went and played in the state competition. Thankfully they made the draw that there was only one game per day for him over the competition, because he would never have managed more. He only barely managed the one game. There was lots of extra injections to get him through the game. And then the last thing he watched on television was a bocce competition in Canada. So he went out. He consciously made decisions that the last things that he was doing as death got closer for him was bocce. So there we go.
Yeah. Can I ask, because I know part of the story is how different their experiences were, their healthcare experiences for you. So, with what you're willing to share, I mean, how were their experiences at the end? How was it like navigating, and how were they different? Yeah.
Well, I mean, Kai was very different in that he also had what I would call a kind of hybrid Christianity, which I'm a Buddhist, Heike's non-religious, and clearly in retrospect, and I think at the time we knew, he was engaging with that to make meaning of the death process, right? So you knew what was coming at some level, even though the advice we got, and we stuck with that, was we're always open to answer the questions, and we would answer them honestly, but he never asked the questions. Yeah, he never talked about death.
And we were told only answer questions, because you do not want to give a dying young person information they're not ready to deal with.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like sex ed, I guess. You honestly answer the question, but you do not push things on them that they're not ready to hear.
And so with Kai, he got himself baptized in January. We supported him in that. He had a great relationship with a local pastor, and I think that was part of him preparing for it. And it was ironic because he was preparing for it and we were trying to prepare for it, but that's where we were really struggling to get the help from hospital, weren't we?
Because Kai had spent so much time in hospital, he basically just had enough. And I think he also knew that it was finished. We had a number of conversations with him where he said, I don't want to go to hospital anymore. And then we said, well, but then we can't treat you. At some point, antibiotics are not enough anymore. And he said, well, what happens if I don't get antibiotics? And we, answering questions honestly, we said, well, then you will die. And he went, no, okay. So he took that information and he consciously said, I do not want to go to the hospital anymore. So as his disease or whatever it is progressed, he had difficulty swallowing. And he was fitted with an NG tube first, and then later on a little button in his tummy. But he loved his food. And I think as he realized where this was heading, he decided, what am I doing? I'm withholding something that I really enjoy for an outcome that I can't avoid. So he had a few conversations with us and then started eating first.
Yeah, you did, yeah.
And then later on,
drinking. Well, it was I took him he wanted to go to our local Catholic. He was, that's why I say it was hybrid. He was like, he had a Baptist pastor, but he loved going to the Catholic church. He loved Mother Mary. And I took him for lunch into Sydney to go to St. Mary's Cathedral. We were sitting there for lunch. He was loving his food, and he just was like, oh, I just would love a glass of water. And he said, well, what's going to happen if I have this water? And I said, well, I think that's going to accelerate, your pneumonia, because, the water's going to go straight into your lungs. And that was Thursday lunchtime. And he just started drinking water Thursday lunchtime, and the pneumonia was accelerated. And he died on Sunday night. So there was a really kind of conscious decision on his part that, no, I'm done. I'm going to drink water. And before that, I think it was probably a week or two. It was a few weeks, wasn't it, before that he decided to start really just eating anything he wanted again. And of course, when you're aspirating, the antibiotics can only hold it back for so long.
Mm-hmm. But his big thing was no more hospital. And we made a conscious choice to support him in that. And I think that cost us and it cost him, in the sense that, as you can probably imagine, the doctors in the hospital, especially the PAL care doctors, were not happy with that decision. I have it written black on white in what I call it, a correspondence from the hospital, that the parents are unwilling to bring Kai to hospital because they say he had bad experiences. So we were kind of portrayed as the people holding decent care from our son, whereas what they were not willing to acknowledge at all was the fact that was Kai's decision. He did not want to come anymore. He had enough. He spent so much time in hospital. And that sort of set the tone, I think, for the care we got, or should I say the care we didn't get, in Kai's case, because we were the difficult ones. So in a nutshell, what we were given was a couple of sachets of OxyContin that we could put down his tube or his button. And that was pretty much what we were given. That was our palliative care.
But we'd also done our own research, and we knew that community palliative care was a possible service, because we weren't getting any sort of support from the palliative care team in the hospital. We were like, well, could you refer us? Yeah. And despite weeks of constant badgering to get the referral to the community palliative team, which I got very annoyed at when I found out on that Friday before Kai died on the Sunday, that in fact we could self-refer. No one had told us. It was just that lack of information, that lack of just allowing us to get on with what we thought was the right thing to do. We didn't get that referral through, despite all of that hassling for weeks. It finally was sent through on the Friday before Kai died on the Sunday. I spoke to the palliative care team, who were deeply apologetic about how long it had taken, because of course it was a private service provider. They wanted to get the referral because they could immediately start clipping the ticket. It was revenue for them. And they just apologized because they'd come through so late on Friday, they didn't have anyone to come out to do an initial meeting so that they could provide support over the weekend. Now, that referral also said that it took a view, well, we had a view on that Friday when we were getting quite vocal and very, very intense about the fact that we thought he was sort of days, if not, at the most weeks away from dying. We didn't know at that point it would be Sunday. That referral made it very clear that the palliative care doctor's view was he was months away.
It literally said he's deteriorating, but not end of life. And this was a child with active pneumonia who was eating and drinking, who had been called to hospital about a week before that for a clinical review, to which the palliative care doctor never attended. But he was not dying. I mean, honestly, there are a number of things that were very wrong with that referral. Not to mention the date that it had on it, and then it mentioned things that hadn't happened on that date yet. I think the referral that eventually went through was a little bit of, if I may use the word, no, I'll use a polite word, covering your back. They just basically did not believe us that Kai was dying because we were annoying, pushy parents who didn't follow the rules or whatever.
Yeah. Which was just remarkable, because if you think about most children's hospitals, certainly here in Australia now, they've gone on that journey the last sort of 10, 20 years where you do trust, even if what is the parent saying? I leave aside who they are and how, anxious they might be. I need to consider that as another data point in terms of understanding what's going on here, because they're spending more time with the patient than I am. That in this particular hospital, the palliative care team's culture was still that we know best. Yeah, you do not know your child better than we do. We're the experts. You can't be right. And I think Kai's experience was a very, very strong example of how, that particularly with pediatric, I guess, when you're talking about pediatric death, you've got to trust, you've got to listen to the parents. It's not that you've got to, they're right, but you've got to accept the parents as another and potentially really important data point or insight about what's going on with your patient.
Yeah.
I think to myself, what is it that the healthcare system was experiencing that they would have approached it this way? Like, I'm trying to think of like what was going on there. And, some things come to mind and we'll never know, but was it that Kai was young? That, it's not easy to admit when you can't fix someone who's young. That's one thing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I'm wondering about, and I'm not making excuses for them, but I do scratch my head and wonder why loving parents like you would experience these kinds of challenges. And I'm thinking maybe that's one of them. And the other one being that people have difficulty in the healthcare system with uncertainty. And the fact that Kai did not have a diagnosis of something, that this was whatever it was unknown, so mysterious. They didn't have a roadmap, a big picture roadmap that could help guidepost, where was Kai at? If Kai had had some kind of cancer or cystic fibrosis or some other illness, maybe that had a more known roadmap, maybe the healthcare system would have been able to wrap their head around it. So, and then dealing with two respectfully assertive, loving family members, parents who are trying to leach out unique care for their unique son, as opposed to cookie cutter standard kind of approach. I can see why they might see you as like, well, this is scratch our head. What do we do with these folks? Like they want things that aren't typical, and their approach isn't typical. They're not listening to us carte blanche. Like they wouldn't understand parents who who are doing exactly what Sienna and I are hoping that all caregivers, parents of someone who's ill do, that you are presenting yourselves um, with and on behalf of, we're talking about Kai right now, as people who are looking for unique and a bespoke experience that is curated to your specific values, goals, and yeah, you were trying to individualize Kai's healthcare, and they struggled with that. And they
Yes.
couldn't accept that he was dying because they didn't know what the heck he had.
I think you're spot on there, but I do have to add that there is also a bit of an element of, I don't know if it's personality or team culture, because our neurologist, who is of course in the same position, had absolutely no problem listening to us, and tailoring as much as he could to what Kai needed and what we wanted for Kai, whereas the palliative care team did not. In
Why?
fact,
Why
they
didn't
were arguing with the neurologist
Neurology in front of us.
in front of us about whose patient is this and who makes the decisions here. And we were just sitting there going, excuse me, our child is dying. Can you have your whatever contest outside, please? Like,
Well, what do
there is
you think they
also,
were struggling with? What was the issue? What was their issue?
I think you've spot on, and then I just layer onto that, a doctor who was insecure about her own position, right?
Mm.
So she needed to be in control because she had an insecurity, and a doctor who, if I reflect on it, I don't think saw palliative care as her vocation. Yeah,
Okay.
I think she was doing palliative care as her job, right?
Mm.
And she genuinely, if she could have chosen another position in the hospital, she would have gone.
Mm.
So I think in that hospital system, I think palliative care was seen as the place you go when there's nowhere else that will accept you and allow you to
Mm.
practice. And I think that is a problem because we're all dying from the
Yeah.
moment we're born, right? It's
I'm
just some of us have to die quicker.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about contrasting that experience with Kai with Bodhi's? Because if I remember you saying that, yeah, Bodhi's experience was different, but also I think more aligned. It was better. I think I could use that word.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I
I
think
mean, Kai taught us a lot,
mm,
right? And as dreadful as it was, it taught us that it is up to us to make this happen. And as Richard said, it also taught us that we can self-refer. So as soon as we all realized what was happening with Bodhi, including Bodhi, who had also said, I am not staying in hospital. I'm not dying in hospital. I want to die at home like Kai. Richard basically started working the phone to get a referral to community palliative care so that Bodhi's care would be done by them rather than the hospital.
yeah, I'm just going to take one step back because when Kai was dying, that hospital system had Bear Cottage, right? And Bear Cottage was a place that you went when you were a baby or basically up until you sort of around 10 or 11, wasn't it? 12?
No, 17, remember?
Oh,
That was the whole.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was up till 17, and we took Kai there, but we said, look, here's somewhere we can go. And honestly, an amazing facility, amazing staff. If you think
Like
about
a
caring,
hospice? Like a
It's a
hospice.
it's a
hospice.
hospice.
Children's
Yeah,
Oh.
but separate from, it has its own location. It genuinely is the most amazing facility and place to go to die. Yeah, if you're a child or a baby. And we took Kai there, and he just said, it's for babies. I don't want to come here because he was already at that point 16, I think, maybe, yeah, 16. And what it was he was an adolescent. He wasn't that young child, yeah. And I think because we've had so many young children go through, particularly cancer, yeah, and that facility I think was catalyzed by that. But we had a gap, and in the time between Kai dying and Bodhi dying, in fact, a year before Bodhi died, yeah, I think it was just over a year. We had the adolescent and young adult hospice established. just
Oh,
across the road, and it is designed specifically to support young people dying from that sort of mid-teens up until
25,
25,
I think.
26,
Mm.
recognizing that their experience of death is very different than
mhm.
because otherwise in Australia, your only other choice is well, in New South Wales
Hospital.
where we are, is to go into an adult hospice. If you can
Yeah.
imagine being a 16, 17, or early 20s and going into an adult hospice, that's
Which mainly has elderly people,
people, yeah,
you know.
it's a bit grim, right? And that's where we've recognized that in our particular state or province or whatever you want to call that. And that's where we went with Bodhi. In fact, Bodhi was one of the first patients to go there. And it was just so liberating for all of us because it also meant that there was respite for us. We got to go to the theatre because, we could, because of where it was in the city, we could catch the ferry to go to the opera house. And Bodhi was comfortable enough with the staff there because it's small, talking 10 beds. I think it
Mm.
was 10 beds, the whole facility. So it's just extraordinary that facility came in as well. But really, what was happening when we were there, when the when the hospital team said, "That's it. There's no more care that we can give Bodhi," we actually had that conversation, which was a really powerful conversation. We tried to have it, remember, and that ended up in a fight between whose patient it was. But this was really clear. And he became a palliative care patient in December. And we think because of the care that we had, he'd already worked on his bucket list even before we kind of had that official handover through going and spending time at Aya, which is that facility. And it was like as soon as that conversation happened, it was like, right, let's get that bucket list out.
Mm.
There were 10 things on his bucket list, and we got through all 10 of them, plus some bonus ones. And all of the care around him, from all the professionals, both in Aya, in that hospital system hospice, as well as in the community, with the community palliative care team, was all about what does Bodhi want to do next? Yeah.
Mm.
How do we manage the pain? How do we manage the death process so that he's able to continue to do what he wants to do and can do
Hmm.
before he dies?
Mm.
Um, I want to. I know when we met, we talked about the waiting room revolution a little bit, and these 7 keys that Sammy and I have been talking about for a number of years. And I wonder if you felt like the idea of activating patients and families, or if there were particular keys that you felt were things that you were doing that made a difference or that you wish you had done sooner. And I can, there's zooming out to get the big picture and knowing your style as parents and as your children themselves and the ripple effects for the family and connecting the dots. And these are just some of them. But um, do you find that those keys as a framework helpful? Do you think, some of those played out in your story?
A- a- Absolutely. And particularly, I think that's probably what you were just picking up on, right? Was the zooming out is with that sort of, and it was, I don't know, it was almost like there was a ritual that we didn't have with Kai, because that ritual with Kai was, that transfer into I'm now in palliative care, which I think too many people characterize as, I'm about to die. Well, no, I'm not necessarily right in end of life. In fact, I might be just before end of life. And I think that's where we clearly had with Bodhi, right? Is the hospital team were putting their hands up and saying, we're done. There's no point in further interventions because they're not making a difference.
Mm.
And that was quite relieving, right? Because that meant that, things that we were trying that were invasive for Bodhi, he didn't have to worry about those anymore. So I think that sort of moment was very powerful for us to kind of go, oh, okay, then we're in palliative care. That bucket list became our roadmap
Mm.
as we zoomed out, because it was like,
Mm.
here we are, we're at the
Mhm.
beginning of the end. Yeah, the end is coming. And it was, I don't know, it was liberating in a sense, in
Mm.
in that, um, and I think it was very powerful that we had that we had his bucket list, because it genuinely was a way for all of us to keep focused and keep busy and feel like we were making the most of the time. We did some crazy. I mean, number one on his bucket list was skydiving, but he'd had a full spinal fusion, right? So despite the fact that he knew personally, one of the co-owners of a skydiving business, and as he said, oh, like I passed on Bodhi's request to him, and he came back and he said, Richard, I'm really sorry. I got the team round. We spent 2 hours brainstorming it. We just couldn't work out a way to do it that wouldn't negate our professional insurance, our insurance. We just couldn't do that one. So that was one that we couldn't do. But next was he wanted to go to Uluru. So he wanted to go see the big rock in the middle of Australia. And we did mad things, like we drove endlessly for
3 days.
3 days to get there. We spent 2 days there. And then bizarrely on the way there, we finally got the okay to get a stoma. Right. So he was one of the things that, because of that peripheral neuropathy, right, everything was stopping working, right? And that was a real problem. He was bloated and it was just so uncomfortable when you're full of poo, right? And I think that we were having trouble getting approval for the stoma because he was, his prognosis wasn't good. But we argued really vocally that the stoma was going to make a huge difference too, even if it was just weeks, did not matter. It's a really straightforward operation, right? It's not complicated at all. High success rates, really, really good quality of life outcome improvements. And for him, it was a revelation, but it also meant we had to rush back from Uluru. But it made such a difference, that intervention, that surgery, to what then became, what was it? He had it February, March, April, May. Like he only had it for 4 months. But it transformed. Yeah.
That's where your, invite yourself point of the keys is really important. We knew this would make a big difference for Bodhi. The system was not too keen to do it because they don't like stomas in the first place, because we have this hang up about these things, right? And then, oh, well, he wasn't going to live long enough. So we actually, again, have ended up advocating, and I just kept ringing the hospital. When is this happening? When is this happening? And in the end, I contacted our lovely neurologist and said, look, mate, can you possibly talk to the surgeons and can you explain that this kid does not have long left and we would like to make it as good as possible. Basically, we can, once he has a stoma, we can put him full of softeners, and it doesn't matter how it comes out, it just ends up in the bag, and this kid can live his last few months, weeks. And it was the neurologist's intervention, I believe, that suddenly meant that we got a date, right? So it is that, yes, walk two roads, live life, make the most of it, but prepare and do invite yourself. The doctors are specialists, but when it comes to your child and their needs, you are the specialist, and advocate for what is necessary. Don't assume that the specialist knows everything. Don't necessarily take no for an answer. And yes, you might get portrayed as a difficult parent or a difficult person, but at the end of the day, this is your life and your quality of life. So my advice would be, don't hold back.
That's very important advice, and powerful, especially coming from someone who's walked that walk. For the listeners who might not know what a stoma is, it is, an operation that can be done on someone's bowels, so their plumbing, to reroute the plumbing from the usual exit, which in this case would be your bum, let's just say in lay terms, reroute it to through the skin, through your stomach, into a bag, so that you're able to poop in a bag and manage poop, and clean the bag from the front of your body. And so it can be a major quality of life intervention for people who have been plagued by plumbing problems that cause them lots and lots of other symptoms like abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be a real relief. And it sounds like it was Bodhi who got it, right? That Bodhi was able to get this procedure late in his illness, where some people would say, well, we don't do that. We won't.
You're gonna die anyway. So
Yeah,
what's the
what's
point?
the
Yeah,
point? You
yeah,
only have months to live
yeah.
anyway. He had a lot to do. He had his bucket
Mm,
list, and he was still able to be up and about. And so instead of having months left that were highly symptomatic and poor
mm,
quality of life, he was able to get this convenient way of bypassing all these symptoms, despite the trade-offs. It made
mm.
sense to him as an individual, and that you two advocated for that. And I love, Heike, your advice about, you best, and who cares, quite frankly, what they think, It is your
Mm.
life, your body, your child, your time, and, it's really the only way to move forward. Because looking back, even for you guys, you need to know that you did everything that you could and that you didn't stay quiet and sheepish.
Mm.
Um, maybe when it came to Kai's illness experience, you didn't know what you didn't know. You didn't know. I mean, you were already activated, empowered people, but it's a foreign system and you don't really know what to be activated about. And you can't ask for things that you don't know you should ask
Yes.
for.
Yep.
So you came to Bodhi's journey more in the know because of
Oh,
Kai.
even further than that was like the referral to community palliative care.
Mm,
I went through the hospital system because within our state we have regions, and the regions don't talk to each other, right? So you've got a hospital system that is a
yeah.
site, right? And if you've got to go across the border, oh my goodness me, that's a huge thing.
Mhm,
So I went across the border from where we were in Aya in Sydney, because we lived 3 hours south of Sydney,
mhm,
in the region. And I went and found the community palliative care that would look after us because they were responsible for our
mhm,
region. And they weren't a
mhm,
private provider; they were within the public system. And it took me quite some time, but I actually found the administrator who ran the team that contained the doctor that would come and do the initial consultation and admit us into their part of the system. And I told her Kai's story, and I said, "This is the reason I'm talking to you." And she was like, "Oh," she was horrified. She said, "No way is that going to happen. We're going to look after you." She said,
mhm,
"Here's the fax number." I know in this day and age we still use faxes
mhm,
for
mhm,
for referrals within the medical system. I don't know why that is. So here's the fax number. Here's the name of the doctor, and I'm taking your mobile number. And within 20 minutes, I promise you, within 20 minutes of me receiving that referral, I will call you to confirm that I've received
mhm.
it and that
Nice.
we will set up that first referral. So as we're sitting there in Aya, one of the other doctors, one of the junior doctors went away, rang because I said to her, here's all the details. And then she comes back half an hour later and she says, "Yep, I've made the referral." And I said, "So did you send a fax?" No, 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 because when I asked, they told me that it needed to go here
Mhm,
rather
mhm,
than there. So I've sent it to this other fax, and I knew which one that was. That was actually sort of two levels up and wasn't the one. Yeah. So it still had to work its way through, and hence the risk of getting lost and going to the wrong place. And this is what I was trying to avoid.
mhm,
Um, so I said to the junior doctor, "Could you please just humor me? And could you also just go away and resend it to this fax number as well? Just humor me, please." So she did that, and guess what? 10 minutes later, I get the phone call saying, "Yep, Richard, got the referral. Thank you so much." I said, "Well, we're traveling down today. Should we drop in?" And she said, "No, no, no, you don't drop in. We're community support. The doctor will come to your home. You're there this afternoon. She'll be
mhm.
there 9 o'clock tomorrow morning."
Oh,
Wow.
beautiful. Mhm. You mentioned that you have another, I'm going to say child, but probably not child, but you do
Nice.
have
Yeah,
Young
another,
sure,
adult.
right?
a
Another
young
young adult.
adult.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. How old?
God, is he 20?
He's 22 now.
He's 22 now. Yeah. And so he was the middle
Yes.
child. Yeah.
He
Okay.
was the lucky or unlucky child in the middle that was, absolutely, but we don't like to use the word normal, but standard, like couldn't
Yeah.
be more neurotypical than you could wish for. And of course, he had to go through all of this.
Yes, I was thinking that.
And he was there when both his brothers died. So he was in the room with them at that very moment. So as you can imagine, we were very busy parents with 2 kids with special needs. And he was the kid stuck in the middle with mom and dad, always busy, there's always some drama with the other 2. He had to grow up with that. And then he also had to grow up with having to say goodbye to 2 of his brothers. So it has not been an easy road for him either.
Do you think that the journey of how things ended changed how he grieved and how, well, or maybe how both of you as a parents grieved, but I know it's hard to speak for him, but have you noticed as parents how if the grieving process was different, or how important palliative care or access to feeling supported or even doing the bucket list made a difference, because it feels like, I could see your face light up when you talked about, the 10 plus the extra, like that's what you're going to remember of those last weeks and months, and not,
Yeah, including
all the
getting a
pain.
tattoo the week before he died. I mean, why were we getting a second tattoo?
Oh, a
Like he wanted a
tattoo.
tattoo. So he got a tattoo that was on his bucket list, but then he wanted a second one. And
Oh,
and it was literally the Saturday, he died 7 days later, and he was barely at that point, he was barely with us. But no, he was
what did
having.
you get? Can we know?
Oh, he got the second tattoo was the logo of his boccia club.
Oh,
Right. And then the tattoo before that, the first one was a rainbow.
A little rainbow.
let's see. You have one too, Heike?
We all have one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll have
That
one.
little
I see
rainbow
it.
there.
Oh, the
Yeah, I see
rainbow.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So he
beautiful.
had that first, and then to Bodhi's surprise, Yasha turned up with a rainbow tattoo on Bodhi's birthday. And Richard had to go and get one. When Bodhi was down, Bodhi was basically challenging him, come on, Dad, come on, Dad. So
Yeah.
Richard had one, so then I had one down too.
Oh,
But, so that's now Bodhi's tattoo. But yes, it is definitely taking that control and writing that bucket list, which he had sort of already started, but then the staff at Aya, the hospice, helped him. And he basically wrote, what he still wanted to do, what he wanted done with his body, where we were to have a service for him in the local brewery, I may add. It gives you an idea of the kind of kid Bodhi was. Doing all of that did make, I think, grieving easier in that, we were prepared, obviously, and I always do feel terribly sad for parents who, get that phone call where it's a sudden death. That must be utterly horrendous. We had time. We had time to prepare. We had time to talk things through. And in Bodhi's case, we actually got to live with him. Richard managed to get significant months off work so that we could go and do things with him. And it just makes it easier because you get to say goodbye properly and you get to live with them, and you've done everything you could. And it also made very practical things easy, like we did not have to worry what to do with Bodhi's body. He chose not to have an autopsy. He wanted to be cremated and put out in the ocean where the humpback whales swim. So we went and did that. And we had his farewell in the brewery. And I can tell you some people were a little bit judgmental about the place we chose for a service.
But it wasn't us, wasn't our choice.
That was his choice. Yeah. It was really easy for us to deal with all of those questions. And I think it was also final honoring him, of what he wanted.
Last year. So Bodhi died in May 2024.
It's only been just a year.
Yes.
Wow. So when I met you, that was just a few months. It was so fresh. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
So just a year ago, Brody passed. He died. And before that, yeah, Kai, how many years has it been since Kai died?
Kai was 2018 when he died.
So 2018 and then 2024. So 6 years in between.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, picking up on that thread, I mean, what is it like to be, yeah, husband and wife through this? I mean, like, if it's hard, what was that like for the two of you as a couple?
Well,
Well,
yeah, it's like you got a job to do, right? So we were very pragmatic about it. For example, with Kai, particularly with the wound care, yeah, because of the peripheral neuropathy. Wound care is a whole thing in itself, and that's where we just went too much. I took on wound care, so that was my speciality. Heike took on pharmacology because Kai also had significant mental health issues. So he was diagnosed bipolar. We actually think that was the brain coping with the pain. Yeah, that in fact, what
Mm,
was a bipolar diagnosis in
Mhm.
retrospect was his brain coping with what was increasing pain from the peripheral neuropathy.
Mhm.
I still don't quite understand why we never had that conversation or explored it because we had lots of tests in terms of testing the progression of the deterioration of the nerves, but we never made the leap in terms of trying understanding some of his behaviors, which
Mhm.
at times we thought were like stemming behaviors, but in retrospect, what they were, I think, they were pain.
coping.
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
coping with
mm,
pain. Yeah.
But how do
Um,
you, I guess, Richard, like how do you, I don't know. I think I'm trying to, and maybe it's a personal question you don't have to answer, but it's about, how do you stay together married and still have humor or still,
I
and
think
don't get broken by this, I think.
I think it's just the kind of people that we are. I mean,
yeah,
we were
yeah.
both doing human rights work from I guess we both have a very strong sense that the world is not quite right and we need to do whatever we can to make it better.
Mm,
But we also have a sense that our individual issues are, if you like, negligible in the big scheme of
Mhm.
things and the things people deal with all around the world. Um, and we're maybe, I mean, Richard definitely has a spiritual or religious side to how he sees the world. For me,
Mhm.
it's not religious as such, but it's a very strong sense of more philosophical justice angle. And
Mhm.
yes, we got to deal with what is in Australia known as a shit sandwich, where, you have bad things happening from both sides. But at the end of the day, that's just the way life is. Compared to people in many other countries, we are incredibly blessed
Mhm.
and privileged. And there's no point sitting in a corner moping about things. You just get on with it. And we had both of us very strongly a feeling that it's not about us, it's about our kids, and we just have to do what we have to do for them.
mm.
Mhm.
Um,
And I think to kind of put it, I mean, we came together in our relationship because of that sense of service, right? And we call it human rights, but in service of others. And I think to have the opportunity to support someone, in the dying process, it is such a privilege. It genuinely is such an amazing time of our life. I don't know why we don't celebrate it the same way we do birth, right? Because coming into life and leaving life are just such special times. And I think that's where that strengthened our relationship, and that
Mhm.
we made a commitment to be in service of our children going through this extraordinary, far too early, right? I mean, it is genuinely not the way things should go. But look, Sam, to your point around, or I don't know, I can't remember who said it, but you're not broken. And I go, well, bits of you break, right? Because you're a parent. Yeah,
Yeah.
your child has died. In fact, two of our children have died, and there's no question. And I think, ironically, I feel more broken about Kai's death after experiencing Bodhi's. Yeah,
Mm.
because then there's this sense of
What
real
could have, should
disappointment.
have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
couldn't Kai have had the same death process?
Mhm.
Why, and even it would have been different, right? But why couldn't we have had the same support or a similar support that would have allowed us to give Kai a different experience of death? And I think it was, he got on with it though in retrospect and found his own way because
Yeah.
around him he didn't have the support that Bodhi did because we didn't know, right? Because we didn't know that was where he was at until it was too late to get the
And
system to help us,
yeah,
right?
when we asked for it, it was
The system couldn't respond.
system is a Titanic. Before
Yeah.
that got turned around, it was too late.
Yeah, but look, I mean, the practical things is you do have to just take your moments out, right? You do just have to find those times, and we did ask for help. At times, I got to be honest though, when it was the two of them, because both their needs were so complex, just in terms of symptomatic
Yeah.
management, it was really, really hard to find people who had that level of expertise or that comfort
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
managing both of them
Mm.
at the same time. And with Bodhi, though, I think things like Aya, that was just that, as I said, is we went to the theatre. We took a night out for 2 or 3 hours where we would just go and spend time with each other,
Mhm.
because the intensity of then having those roles with Bodhi, I didn't have wound care, but there was plenty of other things in terms of pain management. Just poo and wee was all quite technical in terms of just managing all of that. There was so much to do, and in fact, I can still remember. I'll never forget getting up and feeling so completely lost the morning after Bodhi died because all of a sudden my day wasn't set out for me, right?
Well, this is what I'm thinking, like the intensity of life for your family. Um, how, you all leaned in to do this together. You had your different roles, let's just say.
Mm.
Um, and then it's over, you know,
Mm.
in a way, like that
Yep.
intensity of like the practical things that you were doing every day, the way you spent your time. And, and they are now gone, and you have to reorient yourselves to spending your days differently and having more time. How have you sorted that out? Seriously, like, like how have you sorted that out? It's like it's beyond what, for example, I'm experiencing as an empty nester now. Both
Mm.
of my daughters have left, and we're in this big old house, my husband and I. The intensity of parenting feels like it's entered into a different chapter. I don't want to say it's over because I know it's never over, but you know what, the intensity of it. And then I look at you guys, and Yasher's older, he's a young adult himself, and then the boys are gone. And so how are you dealing with, I don't know, the quietness, the
There's no quietness.
no.
So no, so I mean, I did have a point in 2015 where I had done basically 15 years of caring. And I did say to Richard, if I don't get to use my brain sometime soon, I will one day go get the milk and never come home.
Mhm.
So I started studying again, part-time, on top of everything else, I did take some months off here and there whenever it was necessary. So we have kind of always had our lives busy around human rights and activism. And that's, I guess, what to a large extent filled our days. Bodhi also was quite instructive, particularly Bodhi,
Mhm.
around what we had to do after he died.
Mm.
There are some legal issues that he gave me to advocate for and try and sort out. And he was also very clear that his beloved boccia sport, which we had got ourselves involved in, we had to continue with.
Mhm.
Which means I'm the president of Boccia Australia. I'm on the board
Oh.
of the International Federation for Boccia, which is a fastest Paralympic sport, fastest growing Paralympic sports, one of only two sports specifically designed for people with a disability. So all the other Paralympic sports are adapted from
Yeah, yeah.
mainstream sports or able-bodied sports. And Heike's a level 2 referee working towards her international referee status.
Oh.
So
Wow.
in that sense, it's a wonderful way to remember
And,
Yeah,
you know, I
Yes.
have
and
to
make
say,
sense of.
Honor.
Yeah,
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 Kai played the game as
yeah.
well, and not as competitively as Bodhi, but so that's become for us a way of honoring both children, and it keeps us very busy. I
Yeah,
do.
off to Korea in 4 weeks' time, where I will represent the world boccia at a World Cup, and then we're going to spend 2 weeks. We're wrapping 2 weeks around it to take a little bit of time for ourselves on holiday in Korea. And I wouldn't otherwise choose to go to Korea, but boccia's taking us there. So in that sense, Bodhi's still directing us.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I did have one question, and I know you have to go, but it's a bonus maybe. But uh, do you have
Bonus
any
time.
advice? Do you have to go?
No,
Oh,
no,
you're okay.
Yes,
just
they
you
have
just
to
made
go.
me.
No,
I
Richard.
listened.
Because you gave a lot of advice to parents, but do you have any advice for doctors or clinicians or the healthcare providers? If you could, tell them one thing, what would you want them to know?
Listen to your patients.
Mm.
Just
Yeah.
listen. Even if they don't fit in what you think is right, try and understand where they're coming from, and just don't treat them like human beings, and don't think you are the person that has all the answers.
Mhm.
That's really all.
Yeah, and perhaps the way, because meet them where they are, right? Don't expect them to step towards you because they're stepping towards death, right? It's like just meet them where they are and then walk alongside them.
Richard, Heike, thank you so much for joining us today. I really want to thank you for your time and going extra, and it's a pleasure as always.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, look, this is part of what we continue to do to help us honor them, right? Is to share with others. And Sammy, it's just wonderful to hear that Bodhi and Kai can continue to have an impact well past them being here. And that's how, for us, that's how they continue to live.
Yeah.
And for every listener who's going to be listening to this podcast, I think it is going to be a little bit of a, just reset, I think.
Thanks for listening. Our workbook, Applying the 7 Keys for Navigating a Life-Changing Diagnosis, is available now at all online bookstores. Visit our website for more details and to access our free resources, event listings, and learn all about our movement. The best way to keep up with us and our work is to join our newsletter list, or better yet, become an ambassador. This episode was produced by Maggie Sivak, myself, Kayla McMillan, Shilpa Jyothi Kumar, Bethany Bachanfuso, and Kathleen Bartlett. Our theme music is Maypole by Ketsa.